February 5th, 1958. It is around 2 in the morning over the dark Georgia coast. A B-47 Stratojet bomber is flying high above the marshes near Savannah, running a simulated combat mission, the kind the Air Force flew almost every night of the Cold War. In the cockpit sits a pilot named Howard Richardson, 35 years old, watching his instruments in the green glow. The flight is routine, the night is clear. And bolted into the belly of his aircraft, riding along on this practice run, is a live hydrogen bomb. Somewhere below and behind him, an F-86 Sabre fighter is climbing through the same black sky. It is part of the exercise. The Sabre is supposed to find the bomber on radar and make a mock interception, a pretend attack on a pretend enemy. But the radar picture that night is wrong. The fighter pilot is being vectored straight toward the bomber, and the warning he needs to break away does not reach him in time. He is closing on Richardson's B-47 at hundreds of miles an hour, in the dark, with no idea how close he already is. At 38,000 feet, the two aircraft find each other the hard way. The Sabre slams into the bomber from below, metal tears through metal. And in that single second, a routine training flight over Georgia becomes the first time in history that the United States would lose a hydrogen bomb on its own soil and never get it back. The danger that night was never an enemy. There was no enemy. The danger was a system that thought nothing of flying live thermonuclear weapons over sleeping American cities on ordinary practice runs, night after night, year after year. And when one of those weapons ended up at the bottom of the sea off a populated coast, that same system would decide it was safer to leave it there, buried in the mud, than to risk digging it back up. This is the first hydrogen bomb ever lost in America. None of this makes sense until you know what was bolted into the belly of that bomber. It was a Mark 15, one of the first lightweight hydrogen bombs the United States ever fielded. It was 12 feet long and weighed 7,600 pounds, almost 4 tons of metal and wiring and explosive. Inside it sat around 400 pounds of conventional high explosives, the chemical charge whose job was to compress the nuclear core and start the reaction. It carried highly enriched uranium, and its design yield reached as high as 3.8 megatons. That is more than 250 times the power of the bomb that flattened Hiroshima. One weapon, riding in the belly of a training plane, over the marshes of Georgia, in the middle of the night. And the Mark 15 was not some special one-off being ferried under guard. This was normal. Strategic Air Command kept bombers in the air around the clock, loaded with real weapons, so the United States could strike back within minutes if the Soviets ever launched first. To make the crews ready, they flew the real thing on practice missions. The bomb in Richardson's B-47 was not a dummy. It was the genuine article, with its conventional explosives live, flying a simulated war over a real coast. Everyone in that program understood what they were carrying. They flew with it anyway because the doctrine demanded it, and because for years nothing had gone catastrophically wrong. The whole system ran on assumption that the odds would keep holding. February of 1958 was the month the odds stopped holding. It helps to picture the mission itself. The B-47 was a long-range jet bomber, sleek and fast, with swept wings and 6 engines slung under them, the backbone of Strategic Air Command in the 1950s. Richardson had taken off from Homestead Air Force Base in Florida and flown north up the coast on a long simulated strike, the kind that could last most of a night. The Sabre that hit him belonged to an air defense unit whose job was to practice catching incoming bombers. So the whole encounter was friendly fire by design, 2 American aircraft running a war game over their own country, one of them carrying a real hydrogen bomb to make the rehearsal feel real. This was not the first sign that flying live bombs was a gamble. The year before, in 1957, a transport plane carrying nuclear material had gone down. Bombers had already been lost in accidents across the country. The military had a quiet name for these events. They called them broken arrows, the code for an accident involving a nuclear weapon. The Tybee Island crash would become one of dozens of broken arrows the United States logged during the Cold War. The men who flew the missions knew the category existed. They knew planes fell out of the sky, and they knew what those planes were carrying. The risk was understood and accepted long before it found Howard Richardson at 38,000 feet. Go back to the collision. The instant the saber strikes, the night turns to chaos. The fighter is mortally hit. Its pilot, Lieutenant Clarence Stewart, ejects into the freezing dark and rides his parachute down toward the South Carolina pines, coming to Earth near a small town called Estill. He survives, his aircraft does not. Richardson's bomber is also badly hurt. The collision has torn into the B-47 and crippled one of its engines. The plane is shaking, losing fuel, and barely controllable. Richardson does the only thing a pilot can do. He noses the wounded bomber down out of the high cold air and starts looking for somewhere, anywhere, to put it on the ground. The nearest runway is Hunter Air Force Base, just outside Savannah. He turns for it. Then he runs the math no pilot ever wants to run. He is flying a damaged aircraft toward an emergency landing, and strapped into the belly of that aircraft is a 7,000-pound bomb packed with 400 pounds of high explosives. If he hits the runway hard, or if the gear collapses, or if the plane breaks up on touchdown, those conventional explosives could go off. That alone would be a blast big enough to destroy the aircraft, the runway, and everyone near it. He cannot land safely with that weapon aboard. So Richardson makes a decision that almost no one in history has ever had to make. He calls Hunter and asks for permission to drop the bomb. He gets it. At 7,200 feet, out over the water near the mouth of the Savannah River, the bomb bay of the B-47 opens into the night. The Mark 15 falls away from the aircraft, tumbling down through the dark toward the black surface of the Atlantic. Richardson watches for the flash. The crew braces. A 400-pound charge of high explosive is about to hit the water somewhere below them. There is no flash. No fireball climbs out of the sea. The bomb goes into the water near a place called Wassaw Sound and simply vanishes beneath the surface. No detonation. No mushroom. Nothing but the dark sound and the marsh and a wounded bomber turning for home. Lightened of its weapon, the B-47 steadies. Richardson brings the crippled aircraft down onto the runway at Hunter Air Force Base and lands it safely. Every man aboard walks away. Forgetting that bomber and its crew home in one piece, Howard Richardson would later be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He had just dropped a hydrogen bomb into the ocean off the Georgia coast, and he had done it to keep it from killing anyone. If you are still with me, this next part is where the story stops being about one bad night and starts being about a question that has never gone away. The conventional explosives never went off. That much is certain. And the official position of the Air Force is that a full nuclear detonation was never even possible, because the bomb's nuclear capsule, the core that makes the reaction go, had not been installed for the flight. According to the Air Force, what they dropped into Wassaw Sound was a weapon without its nuclear heart, fitted instead with a heavy dummy cap of lead. By that account, the Mark 15 in the silt off Tybee Island could never produce a mushroom cloud, no matter what happened to it. It is dangerous as a mass of high explosive and enriched uranium, but it is not a hydrogen bomb waiting to detonate. Then comes the part that has haunted the story for decades. In 1966, in testimony before Congress, an Assistant Secretary of Defense named W.J. Howard described the weapons the United States had lost. He listed the Tybee bomb among a small number of weapons he called complete, a bomb with a nuclear capsule containing a plutonium trigger. That testimony was classified for years. When it was finally made public, it directly contradicted what the Air Force had told the people of Georgia for a generation. One government voice said the bomb was unarmed and harmless as a nuclear device. Another government voice, under oath before Congress, said it was a complete weapon. The dispute has never been resolved. Richardson himself, the man who dropped it, insisted to the end of his life that the bomb carried no plutonium. The Air Force has held to its line. The 1966 testimony says otherwise. And the only object that could settle the argument is sitting under 15 feet of mud at the bottom of a Georgia Sound, where no one can read it. That is the real gut punch of Tybee Island. The conventional explosives never fired, the night ended without a single death, and the bomb is still down there. Intact, lost. somewhere in the silt off a coast where people swim every summer and nobody can tell you for certain what is inside it. The cost of this story was never measured in bodies. No one died over Tybee Island. The weight here is carried by the men who lived through it and by the people who have lived above it ever since. Howard Richardson spent the rest of his life as the pilot who had to drop a hydrogen bomb near a sleeping coast and decide that was the safer choice. He defended that decision for 50 years. He never stopped saying the bomb was not armed, perhaps because he needed to believe it about the thing he had let fall into the sea. He died in 2018, an old man in Mississippi, still answering questions about one night in 1958. And then there are the people of Tybee Island and Savannah, who learned only later that a thermonuclear bomb had been lost in the water at their doorstep. They have raised children, run shrimp boats, and sold beach houses on a coast with a missing hydrogen weapon somewhere offshore. For almost 70 years they have lived above it, fishing and swimming over a bomb that the government searched for and could not find. It is worth sitting with the scale of what went into that water. A Mark 15 at full yield carried up to 3.8 megatons. A weapon that size, if it ever detonated, could kill everything for miles and throw fallout across the whole region. Savannah sits just up the river. Hilton Head and the South Carolina coast sit just to the north. The weapon that fell that night carried by its design hundreds of times the destructive power of the bomb that erased Hiroshima. And it came to rest by the Air Force's own estimate, under 5 to 15 feet of silt at the bottom of Wassaw Sound, a short boat ride from a public beach. For more than 2 months in 1958, the Navy and the Air Force searched for it. The search began the very next day on February 6th with an explosive ordnance disposal squadron and around 100 sailors dragging the Sound with handheld sonar and cables and grappling sweeps, working a cold winter search area near where the crew thought the bomb had gone in. They found nothing. Day after day, they swept the same gray water and came up empty. On the 16th of April, after roughly 10 weeks, the military announced that the search had failed and called it off. The bomb was never found. Decades later, in 2004, a retired Air Force officer named Derek Duke went looking again, hunting for radiation signatures from a small boat, and believed for a while that he had narrowed it down. That search failed too. The readings he found were traced to natural minerals in the seabed. The Mark 15 has never been recovered. It is still exactly where it fell. What happened off Tybee Island was not bad luck, and it was not the work of any enemy. It was the predictable result of a system that flew live thermonuclear weapons over American cities as a matter of routine, accepted that some of those flights would end in wreckage, and filed each disaster under a code name. When this one ended with a bomb in the mud, off a populated coast, the same system weighed the danger of recovery against the danger of leaving it, and chose to leave it. The official judgment for decades has been that the bomb is safest right where it is, undisturbed, under the silt. The people who live above it were never asked. Today, the water off Tybee Island looks like any other stretch of the Georgia coast. Shrimp boats work the channels. Families wade out into Wassaw Sound on hot afternoons. Pelicans drop into the shallows, and the marsh grass bends in the wind, the same way it did in 1958. Somewhere beneath all of it, under 15 feet of mud, sits 7,600 pounds of bomb that the United States dropped one February night and never managed to bring back up. The frightening part of Tybee Island was never that one fighter found one bomber in the dark. It was the decision that came after, the choice to let a hydrogen bomb stay lost rather than risk waking it, and the question nobody can answer from the surface. Is the thing in the silt a harmless shell the way the Air Force swears it is? Or is it a complete weapon the way a man told Congress under oath in 1966? 70 years of swimmers and shrimpers have passed over the answer, and the only way to know for certain is to go down and find it. If you made it this far, thank you for being here. These stories take a long time to research and put together, and every like, comment, and subscription genuinely helps keep the channel going. If you want more stories like this one, consider subscribing. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.